I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. $43.72. That was all I had left. The numbers glared back at me like a cruel joke, mocking me for every bad decision I'd ever made. Rent was overdue, my credit cards were maxed out, and there wasn't a single dollar in savings. I refreshed the page, hoping, praying, that somehow the balance would change. It didn't. My stomach twisted as panic clawed its way up my throat. "All right, everyone," my boss, Mr. Carter, said, as he stood at the front of the conference room later that day. His tone was clipped, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk about restructuring." I sat frozen in my chair, gripping my pen so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "There will be layoffs," he continued, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. "We'll finalize the list by next week." My heart sank. I could feel it in my gut. I was on that list. "Any questions?" he asked, his gaze briefly meeting mine before moving on. I opened my mouth to speak, but quickly shut it again. What was the point? I already knew what was coming. That evening, I stood in line at the grocery store with a basket of essentials, milk, bread, eggs, and tried not to think about the bills piling up at home. $17.43, the cashier said with a polite smile as she scanned the last item. I swiped my card and held my breath. Declined. "Let me try again," I said quickly, heat rising to my cheeks. She nodded sympathetically as I swiped again. Declined. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her tone laced with pity. I swallowed hard as she began removing items from the bag, first the eggs, then the milk, until only the loaf of bread remained. "Have a good night," she said gently, as she handed me the receipt for $2.49. I nodded stiffly and walked out of the store with tears stinging my eyes. I sat in my car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The loaf of bread sat on the passenger seat, like a cruel reminder of how far I'd fallen. "What's wrong with me?" I shouted into the empty car, slamming my palm against the dashboard. My voice cracked as sobs racked through me, raw and uncontrollable. The guilt was suffocating. The maxed-out cards, the impulsive purchases, the vacations I couldn't afford but justified as self-care. How did it get this bad? Back home, surrounded by unpaid bills and debt collection notices scattered across my kitchen table, I felt completely defeated. The silence of the apartment pressed in on me like a weight I couldn't lift. But as I stared at those bills through tear-blurred eyes, something hardened inside me. Something has to change. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. Rachel's name blinked back at me from the screen. She'll help. She has to. I pressed call, my hands trembling as the line rang. "Claire!" Rachel answered cheerfully, her voice warm and familiar. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk about the investment fund." There was a pause, just long enough for my stomach to tighten. "What about it?" she asked casually, as though we were discussing the weather. "I need some of it," I blurted out, my voice cracking slightly. "Rent is overdue. My cards are maxed out. I'm drowning here, Rachel." She sighed heavily, and I could almost hear her rolling her eyes through the phone. "Claire, the money's tied up in investments right now." "Tied up?" My voice rose. "You said it was for emergencies. This is an emergency." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do," she said dismissively. "But things are tight for me too right now." Before I could respond, she hung up. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills and debt collection notices when a thought struck me. Check the account. I logged into the portal and stared at the balance in disbelief. $0.00. Zero. Every penny of our investment fund. Gone. My chest tightened as anger surged through me like wildfire. How could she? The next morning, I drove to Rachel's house with the bank statement crumpled in my fist like a weapon. She opened the door, her smile fading when she saw my face. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. "You know what's wrong," I snapped, shoving the statement into her hands. "Where is it? You said you'd grow this money. You lied!" Rachel glanced at the paper and sighed like she was tired of dealing with me. "Claire, calm down." "Calm down." My voice cracked as tears stung my eyes. "You drained our investment fund, our safety net. And for what?" She crossed her arms defensively, her expression cold. "I needed it more than you did." I froze, her words hitting me like a slap across the face. "What does that even mean?" "My lifestyle was struggling," she said matter-of-factly. "I had no choice." "No choice?" I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You had a choice to not lie, to not steal." She looked away, jaw tightening. "It's done now, Claire." "You betrayed me," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage and heartbreak. "You betrayed everything we built together." Rachel didn't respond. She just stood there with that same cold expression, as if none of this mattered. I drove home in silence, tears streaming down my face. Dad's voice echoed in my mind. "Always trust your friends carefully." Now it was gone, stolen by someone I thought I could trust. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m., but sleep felt like a distant memory. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by a sea of old bills and receipts. The dim light from the lamp flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the papers. Shadows of my bad decisions. I picked up a credit card statement from 4 years ago, the date printed neatly at the top. My balance back then was only $1,200. My chest tightened as I stared at the number, my mind racing. How did it get so bad? I whispered into the silence, my voice trembling. Memories hit me like a tidal wave. Impulsive shopping sprees where I convinced myself I needed that designer handbag. Expensive dinners out where I ordered the most extravagant dishes. Vacations I couldn't afford, but justified with the words, "I deserve this." My hands shook as I flipped through more statements, each one worse than the last. The guilt was relentless, clawing at me with every page I turned. "You did this to yourself," it whispered cruelly. The next morning, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter as I stared blankly at a cup of cold coffee. Alex's name flashed across the screen. "Claire," he said when I answered, his voice calm and steady. "You sounded upset when we talked last week. Is everything all right?" I hesitated, gripping the phone tightly. "No," I admitted finally. "It's not." There was a pause before he replied gently, "Come over. Let's talk." "I don't know," I said quickly, panic rising in my chest. "It's embarrassing. I don't want to admit how bad things are." "Claire," he said firmly, "you're not alone in this. Everyone makes mistakes. It's what you do next that matters." His words hung in the air long after we ended the call. That evening, I stood outside Alex's door, my stomach churning with nerves. He opened it with a warm smile and gestured for me to come in. "Let's start with where you are now," he said as we sat down in his home office, surrounded by shelves of books on finance and self-help. I hesitated before pulling out a folder stuffed with bills and statements. "It's bad," I muttered. He flipped through them silently, nodding occasionally. Finally, he looked up and said, "Claire, this isn't hopeless. It's going to take work, but you can fix this." His confidence in me sparked something small and fragile inside. Hope. As I left his house later that night with a plan forming in my mind, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to fight back. Alex's home office was nothing like I'd expected. It was cozy, with walls lined with books on finance and self-help, and a faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. He gestured for me to sit across from him at a small wooden desk. "All right, Claire," he began, leaning forward. "Let's get straight to it. If you keep going like this, bankruptcy isn't just a possibility, it's inevitable." I flinched at the word bankruptcy. "I know," I muttered, staring down at my hands. "But," he said firmly, "you're not beyond saving. It's going to take work, but we can turn this around." His confidence in me felt foreign, but oddly comforting. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began sketching out a plan. "First," he said, "we're cutting up all but one credit card. You'll keep one for emergencies only. No more swiping for everyday expenses." My stomach churned at the thought of losing my safety net, but I nodded. Was it really a safety net if it had me drowning in debt? "Second," he continued, "we'll negotiate lower interest rates with your creditors. It won't be easy, but I'll help you prepare what to say." "How do I even start that conversation?" I asked hesitantly. "Be polite, but assertive," Alex replied. "Mention your payment history, and ask if they have any promotions or programs to reduce your rate. If they push back, ask again in a few months." I scribbled notes furiously as he spoke. "Third," he said, his tone growing serious, "you need to increase your income. A side hustle, freelancing, tutoring, anything that brings in extra cash." I let out a nervous laugh. "I don't even know where to start." "That's where passive income comes in," Alex said with a small smile. "Have you ever thought about creating an online course or blog?" "A blog?" I repeated skeptically. "Think about it," he urged. "You've been through this financial mess. Why not teach others how to avoid it? People pay for that kind of advice." The idea sounded overwhelming at first, but something about Alex's confidence sparked a glimmer of hope inside me. By the end of our session, my head was spinning with numbers and strategies. Alex had explained 2 debt repayment methods, the snowball method for quick wins and the avalanche method for saving on interest, and left the choice up to me. "You can do this," he said as we stood to shake hands. His grip was firm and steady, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in months. "Thank you," I said softly, blinking back tears. As I left his house with the plan clutched tightly in my hands, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to fight back. I stood in my bedroom, staring at the row of designer handbags lined up on my bed. Each one was a reminder of a moment when I convinced myself I deserved something nice, something expensive. The black leather tote I bought after a promotion, the glittering clutch I splurged on for a wedding, the crossbody bag I justified as an investment. Now, they weren't treasures. They were burdens. I picked up the tote, my fingers tracing the gold accents. It had cost me $400, money I didn't have then, and certainly didn't have now. My stomach churned as I grabbed my phone and started snapping pictures. Within hours, offers flooded in from resale sites. By the next day, the bags were gone. Canceling subscriptions came next. "No more Netflix?" Sarah asked when I told her over the phone. Her voice carried disappointment, but she didn't argue when I explained that it wasn't in the budget anymore. Spotify went next. Then the meal delivery service. By the time I was done slashing expenses, the only thing left was the internet, because without it, I couldn't work or manage Alex's plan. Meal prepping became my new routine. Every Sunday evening, I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables and portioning out meals for the week. Gone were the days of takeout and fancy lattes on my way to work. Every penny went toward paying off debt or funding my online course idea, teaching budgeting basics to beginners like me. One night, Sarah called while I was scrubbing out a Tupperware container. "Hey," she said cheerfully, "we're all going out for drinks tonight. You should come." I froze, gripping the sponge tightly. I can't," I said finally. "Why not?" she asked, her tone confused. It's not in the budget, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause before she replied gently, Claire, this is temporary. Short-term pain for long-term gain. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. The sacrifices piled up quickly. My social life disappeared almost overnight as I turned down invitations and avoided shopping trips with friends. They didn't understand why I'd suddenly become so frugal, why I wasn't fun anymore. But slowly, so slowly, the balances started to shrink. I logged into my credit card account one evening and stared at the number. $26,800. It wasn't much of a dent, but it was something. For the first time in years, the number was going down instead of up. I leaned back in my chair and let out a shaky breath. The sacrifices hurt, more than I wanted to admit, but they were working. As Alex had said, short-term pain for long-term gain. The screen froze mid-sentence, the cursor blinking mockingly at me. I clicked furiously, trying to save the document I'd spent hours working on for my online course. Then, without warning, the laptop went black. No, 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 I shouted, slamming my palms against the desk. Not now! I pressed the power button repeatedly, but nothing happened. My stomach twisted as panic set in. This can't be happening. The repair shop smelled faintly of burnt electronics and despair. The technician glanced at my laptop and shook his head before handing me the estimate. It's going to be $900, he said flatly, tapping the paper with his pen. The motherboard is fried, and you'll need a replacement. I stared at the number like it was written in another language. $900. My chest tightened as I thought about my dwindling emergency fund and the credit cards I'd sworn not to use anymore. I don't have that kind of money, I whispered, my voice cracking. He shrugged sympathetically, but said nothing. By the time I got home, I felt completely defeated. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank into the couch, tears spilling over before I could stop them. This is it, I said aloud to myself. I can't do this anymore. My phone buzzed beside me, and I picked it up without thinking. Alex's name flashed across the screen. Hello, I answered, my voice trembling. Claire, Alex said gently. What's wrong? My laptop crashed, I choked out between sobs. The repair bill is $900. I don't have it. Alex paused for a moment before replying calmly. Setbacks are part of the journey, Claire. This doesn't mean you failed. But it feels like failure, I snapped, wiping at my face angrily. I was finally making progress, and now this. I know it feels that way, he said softly. But you can adjust your plan without derailing everything completely. His words were like a lifeline in the storm. He walked me through possible solutions, using part of my emergency fund, negotiating with the repair shop for a payment plan, and reminded me that setbacks didn't erase progress. Later that evening, another neighbor knocked on my door with an envelope in hand. Alex told me what happened, she said softly, as she handed me a loan for half the repair costs. Pay me back when you can. Tears filled my eyes again, this time from gratitude instead of despair. Thank you. Thank you so much. She smiled and hugged me tightly. You're going to get through this. The next morning, as I booted up my newly repaired laptop and reopened the course content file, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside me. Resilience. Setbacks weren't failures. They were just another part of the climb. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The balance was there, clear as day, $1,200. For the first time in years, I had earned money while I slept. My online course had launched quietly a few weeks ago, and now payments were steadily coming in. My fingers trembled as I refreshed the page, just to make sure it wasn't some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. The number stayed the same, $1,200. Oh my God, I whispered, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Relief washed over me like a wave, so overwhelming I could barely breathe. Alex's voice crackled through the speaker during our monthly check-in call later that afternoon. "Claire," he said warmly, "you're proving that it's possible." I laughed softly, wiping at my cheeks with the sleeve of my sweater. "It doesn't feel real yet." "It's real," he said firmly. "You've worked hard for this, and you're just getting started." His encouragement was like fuel for my soul. For so long, I'd felt trapped, buried under a mountain of debt with no way out. But now I could see the path forward. My neighbor showed up later that evening with a bottle of sparkling cider and a huge grin on her face. "What's the occasion?" she teased as she popped the cork. I laughed, holding up my phone to show her the $1,200 balance on my account. "This is the occasion." She squealed and pulled me into a tight hug. "Claire, I'm so proud of you." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and tears spilled over again as I hugged her back. "You did this," she said softly, pulling away to look me in the eyes. "You should be proud of yourself." Emily ran into the room as my neighbor poured us glasses of cider, her bunny tucked under her arm, like always. "Mommy," she chirped, climbing onto my lap. "Why are you smiling so much?" I hugged her tightly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Because something really good happened today." "What is it?" she asked curiously, her wide eyes sparkling. "It's a grown-up thing," I said with a laugh, brushing her hair back gently. "But it means we're going to be okay." She grinned and hugged me even tighter, her little arms wrapping around my neck. She didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but somehow she knew it was something good. That evening, as Emily colored at the kitchen table and Alex chatted about plans for next month's budgeting goals, I found myself smiling again, something that had been rare these past few years. The weight on my chest felt lighter, not gone completely, but manageable. For the first time in years, I felt like there was hope for a brighter future. After Emily went to bed, I sat down with my notebook and flipped to the page where I'd written all my debts months ago, the numbers that had once felt insurmountable. I crossed out the first one with bold strokes, paid in full. My chest swelled as I stared at the list. There were still balances left to tackle, still work to do, but this victory felt monumental. For so long, I'd measured wealth in numbers, in bank accounts and paychecks and material things. But now I realized that true wealth wasn't just about money. It was about peace of mind. And for the first time in years, I felt rich.